Olya 是我们最后一位发言的嘉宾，然后他是国际检测机构的教育经理，这是一个第三方的机构，非盈利性的一个机构，总部是在瑞士洛桑。然后今天他要讲的东西就是跟我们平时运动，不管是体育组织还是各方面运动员有关的，有关于比如说他们是如何去检测的，包括他们这个对于针对2022，比如说有什么不同的点。Okay, back to you guys.
Um, so I think we will have presentation from Olya Abasolo, and we will have closed captions on as an option, and I leave it to you.
So I'm going to put up my presentation here, and I want to thank you very much for having me as part of the China Winter Sports Summit. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak about my work and what I do in the area of education, but also as part of the International Testing Agency. So I'm just going to make sure that I can see you as well. Here we go. Excellent. So, of course, the topic of anti-doping may not be the most exciting one and kept for last for a conference here, but I'll try to keep it as engaging and as interactive as possible. I will be speaking for about 15 minutes, and then I will leave some time for questions. And I know, Guy, you already have some questions for me there.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So I will save some time for that. As already was introduced, I am Olya Abasolo Ovchinnikova, a complicated double name, and I'm the education manager for the International Testing Agency. And before I go on to the details of what we do and why I'm here today, I thought it was good to speak about the ITA, as it is an organization that is relatively new in the global anti-doping landscape, but also, of course, in the overall sport landscape. So we are a nonprofit foundation that was created here in the Olympic capital of Lausanne. And we mainly work with the international federations and major event organizers. So assisting these organizations with the anti-doping programs. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means to run an anti-doping program, as it's not just the testing of athletes, it's actually many other things. But that is our main mandate. And we are less than 3 years old, so a very young organization. So here you can see a little bit of our history. Of course, if you are somebody involved in sport, following anti-doping, even from a distance, even reading the headlines in the news, you would see that there were a series of events in anti-doping that led eventually to a need to have an independent organization running anti-doping programs. So whether it was in particular sports, summer or winter, or particular major events like Sochi Olympic Games, if we want to be completely transparent, that was a turning point in the world of anti-doping. All of that led to a creation of an independent agency. So it came to be known right now as the ITA, and we were approved to come to existence in 2016, and we officially became fully operational in July of 2018. So with that quick background, I just want to show you what a testing program looks like for an international federation, a major event organizer, and national anti-doping organization. So as you can see here, it goes way beyond testing. So it's not just testing athletes at major events, in competition, out of competition. It also includes now a lot of science and medical work. So athlete biological passports, therapeutic use exemptions. And so I may be saying a lot of very complicated terms, but you don't need to necessarily understand them all. It all goes to say that there's a lot of science and intelligence behind how an anti-doping program is built. So my particular area of interest is, of course, the education program. And so I'm very excited about some of the changes that took place as of January 1st. And I will talk about it in just a few slides. But this is a snapshot of everything that is an anti-doping program. So here you can see some of our partners. You may be recognizing logos of your organizations. You may recognize the logo of the IOC. So of course we are running the program, the anti-doping program, for both the Tokyo Games this summer and already preparing for Beijing with a small challenging gap of back-to-back games. We're very excited to have our first Winter Games officially as the ITA. But what we do is we provide a range of these services that you saw to all of these organizations. Now, important to note that we may not be doing all of these activities for every single federation. Sometimes they delegate just one part of their program, or sometimes they delegate the whole program to us. Another visual here to show you some of our partners on national levels. So the national anti-doping organizations that work with ITA. Now, Guy, you've made a very valid point when you look at it, say, it's only a few countries. But in fact, to come to a partnership with a national anti-doping organization requires a lot of information sharing. And when we talk about anti-doping, that is confidential athlete information, test distribution planning. So ever since our creation, we've been working very hard to conclude partnerships to be able to share information about test planning with different organizations worldwide. So very excited to have JADA, the Japan Anti-Doping Agency for Tokyo, and of course CHINADA, the Chinese Anti-Doping Agency, collaborating with us for Beijing and for all sport events between Olympic Games, of course, not to forget those. Now I've mentioned education, and that is my area of expertise and my area of work. And so I thought it was important to share with you a key update that you may or may not be familiar with, depending on your role, of course. So we now have a new mandatory standard for education in anti-doping. Now, this is a key turning point. There's been so much focus on sanctioning and testing the athletes that now we're talking about education before doping control. Now, my personal story is that I am an Olympian and I competed in Beijing 2008 Olympic Games in China. So looking forward to hopefully come back for the winter edition in a different role. But I had never received any formal education, and I was tested for the first time when I was 15 years old. So here we're talking about very young athletes that will receive all the information they need to successfully navigate the anti-doping landscape. And that's what we're striving to do with our partners. Now, of course, much easier said than done to be able to educate all athletes from all different parts of the world on a very complicated system, but that's our goal and we'll remain ambitious. And so here on your screen, you see the top 2 points are the things that we do with our partners. So the first step now is we're trying to develop a plan for education. And if you yourself are working with athletes, if you're a national federation or if you're a corporate entity, but you have athletes, it's a similar activity or exercise that you can do on a smaller scale with your own groups of athletes and coaches. Now you need to develop, implement, monitor, and then evaluate at the end of the cycle an education plan, which is a completely new requirement of the International Standard for Education. And then you actually need to run the activities. So running the activities is the fun part, to interact with the athletes, to teach them about anti-doping. And on your screen, you see some of the visuals from previous events, the Youth Olympic Games that we had here in Lausanne. This is the Chinese curling team actually working with us and learning about doping control that you see in the middle. And now we are living in the virtual world, trying to do all of this online. Now, where I see some of the synergies between organizations that may not have a direct connection to anti-doping. So some of you listening and saying, well, you know, I don't necessarily have a connection to anti-doping, but it is a global representation of athletes. It's a global protection of athletes. So it really ties very closely into other areas like mental health, athlete career or dual career balance, and so on. All of these things are interconnected when we talk about protection of athletes. So I'm very interested to present to you some of the activities that we're planning or looking at launching in the coming years in the area of education, and where you could potentially see yourself saying, well, perhaps it's an organization that we could collaborate with on any level. So of course, one piece is to have good educators. So one area that we're looking at is to develop educators for future initiatives. So to say, if you are an international luge federation, and I'm just using an example here, you may have a great program, but nobody to deliver it. So we're looking to enable a great team of international educators to be able to go and do language-specific, country-specific education programs, sport-specific education programs as well. Now, we know there's a lot of access barriers to education. So languages, of course, is a big one. Just now, we have some simultaneous translation, we have some subtitling to try to make it more accessible. So we're trying to do the same thing. We have a series of webinars where we have just added simultaneous translation, but we've chosen 4 languages. So for example, we will have our webinars in Arabic, in Spanish, in Russian, and in French. Now, Chinese is one of the biggest languages out there, but luckily we have a great partner, the Chinese Anti-Doping Agency, that do educate their athletes nationally. So what we're trying to address is key areas where certain athletes that don't speak a language will need that most help. So those are the languages that we selected. And of course, now we're looking at sponsorships, strategic partnerships. What other organizations want to team up with us that have a same or a common goal? So once again, for the webinar program, we have a partner, and we're looking at how we can do that on a bigger scale. So a lot of ambitious projects out there. Some of them may come to fruition, some may not, but we just want to really be able to contribute to enabling the area of education and building some capacity around the distribution of information in anti-doping. A very quick mention here, this is our group of experts. I myself cannot do everything and cannot know all perspectives, so this group is of great help to me. They represent a lot of different stakeholders. So we have a national federation representative, we have a few members here who are retired athletes, those who are sitting on WADA committees, and those who represent national anti-doping organizations. So for example, Mr. Saifei represents the Chinese anti-doping organization, CHINADA, and Yaya Mamamoto represents the Japan Anti-Doping Agency. So that's a great link for us and a great group of experts to make sure that we're on the right track. Of course, we have a group of educators. Once again, those who are trained and competent, know their sports, know their athletes. Most of them are retired athletes that will eventually go out and deliver events on our behalf. So we're looking to build that group. Once again, if you know of somebody, if you think that somebody from your organization may be a good person to be an educator, to join our team, I'm really open and welcome to those ideas as well. Just a quick reminder here of the webinar series. They are open to the public, so you're more than welcome to join if you just want to get more informed on the topic of anti-doping. We hope that this may be a resource for you, and so we are advertising that on our social media channels. Right now, our next session is going to be on March 23rd on whistleblowing, which is another key area of anti-doping. So please feel free to join, or if you have any questions, if you want to connect, I've put up our general inbox address here, but I check that one daily, so please do feel free to reach out to me with any questions. So that's all I have on my end. Guy, if you have any questions for me or any questions from the audience, I am happy to answer those.
Thank you very much, Olya. Indeed, what a welcome addition to the sports family, and what a welcome addition to athletes. And I think we were all fairly stunned when you said, as an athlete of 15, there was no pre-education prior to any testing. You know, the cultural shock that must be to an athlete is extraordinary. How will an athlete so at the games, how will the ITA be known, be seen, be heard, or has your work already been done when we get to the games?
That's a good question. And anyone who's worked on major games with athletes, you want them to see the tip of the iceberg. So the mess that goes on behind the scenes, the athletes just see the smooth experience. So I guess in a way, that would be our goal, is to prepare a very intelligent testing program for games, to test before games. And when we get there, we have trained doping control officers that give athletes a smooth experience if they are selected for testing. So I guess that's really the bulk of our work as it relates to testing. Now, Other areas are, education. If we look at that, we do have a program that we are working on ahead of Beijing. So so much of education has been focused on games time. So, trying to reach athletes when they're already focused, they're already there for the events of their life. So the last thing they want to be told is, hey, do you remember how to check your medications? So instead, we're focusing on pre-games, which means that we will be working with national anti-doping organizations and national Olympic committees before the games to check in and to see, what are you doing to educate your athletes? Are they receiving the information they need? Are they prepared to be tested if the time comes or when the time comes? And if we get a negative answer, if we find that there's a small NOC or a small NATO that do not have the capacity to train and to educate their athletes, we will try to assist them as much as we can, of course, to make sure that every athlete that shows up to Beijing is educated and informed on anti-doping.
And the partnerships with NADOs and national anti-doping associations, I'm now understanding that actually in your 3 years of existence to have 22, including some of the major players, is a remarkable achievement. You're aligned on government regulations, on data sharing, etc. By the time we get to Beijing 2022, how many additional NADOs do you expect to have on board? And what targets do you set for that kind of conformity and acceptance?
I don't think we set any targets in terms of the amount of agreements. Now, these conversations are ongoing with many other NATOs, and they're kind of parallel conversations with different countries. Some happen faster, some agreements we come to quite quickly, some take months. But I think it's just a matter of patience for us to be able to conclude an agreement that works for both parties. As you mentioned, it is a lot of sensitive information that is shared when you come to an agreement like that. That is, we are informing the NATO when the tests will take place and vice versa. And there's, of course, athlete data, confidential medical files, etc. But what's really important here is that eventually we want to get to the point. I think the long-term goal to your question is to have a partnership agreement with every nation in the world. Because what's happening right now is that you may have an athlete who is based in China and will be tested by CHINADA, the Chinese anti-doping agency, one day. And then the ITA could show up on behalf of a sport federation and test that athlete the next day. Now, that's not a very efficient use of resources, and it's not very convenient to the athlete to be tested back to back. So this is what we're trying to find a solution to be more effective. But then, even in the area of education, if I'm building a program and another country is building their own, why don't we use the language resources? Why don't we use each other's resources? Because the area of education overlaps. It's not like testing where you test a weightlifter here and a bobsledder there, and they're completely unrelated. But in education, you can give very similar information to winter, summer, combat, individual sport, etc.
And in current COVID times, I cannot imagine the thought of traveling across borders to go and test. So that idea of integration and efficiency and integrity becomes more important.
Definitely.
I have a question here from James, who is an elite rower, I believe. As a former athlete yourself, what are the key challenges for athletes as regards when it comes to anti-doping?
That's a good question. Now, I think the general perspective of those who are involved in anti-doping, whether it's as myself, as a, doing education programs or sitting on committees or having a voice and knowledge in anti-doping, I think it's a challenge of how the system was built initially, which was focused so much on sanctioning and testing athletes and athletes being held to the highest of the standards. So now what I like about the new version of the code and how the system is evolving is that more and more responsibility is being put on other stakeholders. And as we know from the history of doping in sport, athletes rarely make that decision very consciously themselves. It's a lot of the athlete support personnel or the coaches that have a negative impact. So that would be my top challenge as an athlete myself, now working in anti-doping, is to see how we can bring more responsibility to other stakeholders, how the athletes can be protected more, because the feeling for many years wasn't that the athletes were being protected, but rather the athletes, this language of catching the cheaters, of punishing the cheaters. Let's move away from that and focus on protecting the athletes, because the majority of athletes do want to compete clean.
And I guess take yourself back to being that 15-year-old. What do you think you would like to know then that you know now?
I didn't know anything. I had no idea how this process worked. I just there was 2002 World Championships. I won a bronze medal and I got selected for doping control, and they just told me, okay, here's a cup, pee in a cup. And I'm going, okay, I'm in Turkey. There's a language barrier. There, I don't know what to do. Can somebody come with me? Can I ask questions? What did I take yesterday? I took a painkiller. Am I going to test positive? Just the volume of thoughts that goes through your mind. And so it's very tough to go into doping control without any knowledge whatsoever. Now, of course, any proactive athlete can go and get informed, but it's very difficult unless somebody sits down with you and says, here's what you need to know. So for me, it was a very stressful experience. And I think now, since I competed, things have gotten much better. But, it still is the case for many athletes that they would arrive to a major event like the Olympic Games without, one, receiving an education, but two, maybe not having ever been tested themselves. So still a challenge.
And I think all of us hope that if these games are to get stronger and stronger, and our focus in this whole summit is for winter sports, that there's an equal playing field, that there's a shared value and there's a shared knowledge of anti-doping and the consequences if people break those rules, irrespective of whether you're the host or whether you're from whichever country. And I hope that what's happened, that's played out in the public media and the public arena over the last 2 Olympic Games, 2 winter, probably 2 summer, are a kind of carrion call, a wake up to the world of sport and athletes. You may say that you are the least important of all of the topics that we've had for 2 days, Olya, but let me tell you, without clean sport, without fair sport, our friend from Huya TV won't be converting people from gaming to sport. Our commentators won't have athletes to talk about, and our sponsors won't have events to put their logo on. So I would say you actually underpin the basics of what we've been talking about over these last 2 days. And, long may you be successful. And we really wish, we can see the team you've got. You're covering the globe with a lot of competent young people, goodwill ex-athletes. And I think your call for action to come and support ITA is fabulous. And we'll send out your contact details to everyone, delegates, attendees, media organizations after this. So well done. We really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you very much, Olya Abasolo. Super.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure.